Hi, welcome to Distributed 2020. My name is Anna Savina, and I'm a content marketing manager here at Miro. And today I have an honor to interview Jake Knapp, designer, New York Times bestselling author who wrote a book about design sprints. And he spent 10 years in Google and Google Ventures, and he created a methodology that now is really popular among innovative teams called design sprints. And today we're going to talk about the past and the present and the future, how design sprints can be adapted for remote teams as well. So please welcome Jake. And Jake, can you tell us a little bit about the story behind the remote sprint?
Yeah. So yeah. Well, I mean, it is a remote design sprint now by necessity. So the design sprint goes back to my time at Google, and previously to Google, I'd worked at Microsoft. I'd worked on teams building products that on projects that went well, and I'd also seen projects that didn't go well. And at Google, I saw projects that went well, and I saw projects that didn't go well, and I started to feel like the beginning of every project was really important. It was hard to know which ideas would be successful in the market, and it takes a long time to build and launch a product. And if you know that, and you start arguing, and you don't have the confidence necessarily to build things with your team in the beginning, if you don't have the confidence and the momentum, a lot of good projects don't go anywhere. And by the same token, a lot of times people have confidence in the wrong ideas. So those ideas get out in the world, and they don't go anywhere after you've spent all the time to build them. So what I was thinking at Google was that we could come up with a process for the very beginning of building products, and that we could maybe learn what was the right way, the best way to get started, to build momentum and build some confidence that we were headed in the right direction. And I decided to call that process a design sprint because my background is as a product designer, and I knew that the word sprint would mean fast to everybody. They'd get the idea pretty quickly. And so in 2010, I ran the first design sprint at Google. And then with the help of Irene Au, who's I know another guest on at the conference this week, she really gave me a lot of air cover so that I could run a bunch of these at Google. I ran a couple dozen of them at Google, went to go work at Google Ventures. Google Ventures ran well over 100, about 150 with startups who we'd invested in. And then eventually I wrote this book. Sorry, stay with me here. Wow. Step out of the wind here. I wrote this book, Sprint, and there it is. And now people around the world are running sprints, which is really cool. So nowadays, those sprints are happening over video. They're happening in tools like Miro, and yeah. So that's what I'm here to talk about.
Exciting. I wonder, you mentioned that at first the design sprint really existed at Google, and then you ran it at Google Ventures, and I wonder when design sprints work best. Are there like really universal methods for both big companies and smaller companies, or are there any limitations to the method, and like how do you kind of position it in terms of scale and in terms of like teams that work best with this type of methodology?
Yeah, sure. So I think that it can work well with pretty much any kind of team, and I didn't think that at first. When I ran those first sprints at Google, I was thinking this is something really for Google. My idea was to change the way we worked at Google on big projects, but it turned out that it worked with startups. And in fact, in many ways for startups, it can be easier. There's more clarity often about what's the most important thing to do, and about it, who should be in the room. People are often more willing to stop what they're doing and focus on that most important project for a week, because that's how the design sprint works. You've got to stop and clear your schedule and run the checklist. At the back of the book, there's a 15-page checklist for running your sprint, and that's a big shift and a lot of times in big companies there are a lot of entrenched meetings and emails people have to follow up on, and responsibilities, multiple projects, so they can be tough. But the real key is if the team is committed to trying to make a big project work, and they're at the beginning phase of something that is going to take a lot of time and effort to build. They have to feel like it's worth it to take a week away from their work to do this. Then it can work in any environment. It can work no matter how complex the project is, no matter how big or small the company is. I've seen this work in all kinds of contexts, so long as it's true that you're about to do something really big and you want to make sure you do it right.
It's important to have this kind of big effort and be willing to clear your schedule. But are there any other challenges or maybe mistakes people often make when they are trying to go through the sprint and they, besides just clearing the schedule, are there anything else that teams should avoid?
Yeah, so the biggest problems is to not involve the decision maker in the sprint. And I've seen this firsthand. I myself have made this mistake, which is why it's a requirement now, and it's very clearly in the book. It's one of the first steps in the checklist. Like, you've got to figure out who's the decision maker, and will she or he be in the room during the sprint. It's crucial. A lot of times, and this also gets harder in bigger organizations, it's harder to get that person's time. It's difficult to get them in the room, but if you don't get them involved, then it's so often the case that a team runs a design sprint. They think they can intuit what that person's going to say. And then after the design sprint's over, whether it was successful, whatever they learned, it doesn't matter, because if it doesn't match the leader's vision, then it's unlikely to be able to make progress. And that's very frustrating. The design sprint is hard work, and it's frustrating if you do it and you don't get to move on afterwards.
Yeah, totally. And I wonder, I think, besides this kind of organizational challenges, I can imagine that you also made this really big transition this year into training people to run design sprints remotely. What can you maybe tell us some stories or anecdotes behind this transition and some of the insights that you got in community?
Well, one of the things that's kind of, I don't know, surprising to me, it's obvious. And for all of us who've been spending a lot of time on video this year, like, you'll get this right away, but like, just sitting and looking at video is tiring, like already I'm thinking, like, how can I keep people interested for this like 30 minutes so that they're gonna want to sit here and watch. It's hard to watch video for a long time. It's hard to try to stay focused and plugged in, and the whole schedule, the way we do it in the design sprint, depends on being in person. And there are things that renew our energy when we're in person. We're around other people, our colleagues, and we get the chance to stretch our legs. There's a lot of breaks in the design sprint schedule, and in person, that schedule works. Over video, it's a different matter. And so one of the big shifts was to go from a day that in the design sprint, I might do like a 6-hour day, with big long breaks. Over video, I try to do it in 4. And that, sometimes that means a slower pace for some activities. Some activities you can actually do faster over video. But you still, even if you spend less time, you still have to figure out how to keep people's energy up. And the big thing that I discovered works great is dance breaks. Every 20, 30 minutes, I have a playlist. I'm going to play a dance song. I'm going to put the camera back and, dance. And I'm not a good dancer, but it gets people, just gets the blood pumping. And if nothing else, they're laughing at me. And that's been huge.
That's really cool. Are there anything else in remote sprints that, is better than in person? Like, I don't know, in terms of maybe inclusion into the workshop, or maybe some of these breaks, anything that you notice that is probably more accommodating for the remote environment?
No, totally. There are big advantages to working remote. And one of the philosophies that came out as I was doing the design sprint, and, it's what's in the book is the result of like well over 100 design sprints. And each one was kind of, for me, a chance to learn and a chance to make the process better. And one of the things that emerged for me was that in the beginning, I thought, oh, I'll be able to predict who's going to have the best idea in this team, right? Like, I'm going to know who it's going to be. And I remember some of those early sprints at Google thinking, like, I know it's going to be, this guy or this gal or whatever, like, that's going to be the person who's going to solve this. And really early on, I started to notice what a surprise it was if you allow everyone to work quietly, to not have to have a verbal discussion, but to do their work individually and put their work out, and we can review it without having, a conversation, without judging the person, but just look at the solution. It was fascinating to see what good stuff came out of that. But the amount of participation the degree to which you can level the playing field in a remote context, and again with a tool like Miro, when everybody's over video, you potentially can level the playing field even more. And I think that's really powerful. Like if everybody's typing something in, entering in their own text, we don't see each other's handwriting. And, that's a big deal. Like sometimes you might know somebody's handwriting, or somebody's handwriting might be sloppier than everybody else's, so you can't read it. Their idea never makes it across. So that's a big deal. And one of the most powerful things about doing a design sprint over video is that after it's over, you have this record of it. You have the whiteboard where it happened. That's like this artifact. And one of the biggest challenges of any design sprint is to tell the story later on. There's always people involved, important people who can't be in the room with you. So this whiteboard space becomes, like this document that you can use to tell the story to somebody else, explain why we came to what we came to. For everybody else, it's going to immediately jog their memory and refresh them on why we did what we did. So there are a lot of really powerful things. And actually, I think the future for doing sprints remotely is really bright. Like I think there are many more powerful things that are going to come out of it, including making it easier for facilitators to run this, this long, complex process that's in here. There are a lot of things we can build into templates and into tools to take some of the weight off of the individual to have to do that. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked about it, actually.
Yeah, I think this is what we also do in Miro after a lot of different workshops, is like, because we have this documentation on the board, we often just turn it into like action items on a Kanban board, or we turn it into Jira issues, and it's really like shortens the path between ideating and execution. And I think this is something that probably easier remotely. So I see in the Slido questionnaire, someone is asking you if you think it's possible for remote sprint to be as successful as if everyone is in the same room. So do you think that it can be as successful, right?
Oh, well, it's hard for me to know exactly what the person means. If you mean like everybody sitting in the same room being on video, if everybody's in the same room, I would really want to like interact with people directly. And I have to admit that for me, still the power of the physical objects, of writing on the wall, when you can see things on the wall, when you can use paper and pen, it's helpful partly because it takes a lot less mental energy. There's a lot of mental energy we use when we're on video, and that's part of the reason why the schedule has to be shorter, why you have to take into account things like dance breaks or whatever you can to build people's energy back up. So in terms of like, if I could get everybody in the room, would I still rather do a remote sprint? For me, not yet. But I do think that with the amount of thought, creativity that's going into thinking about how to make remote work better right now, we probably will get to that place where the digital tools, even if you're in the same space, you're going to want to use the digital tools because they'll help you get to a better outcome. And I think that's the promise of the future. But to be honest, I don't think we're there yet.
Of course, I totally understand. I think another interesting question that I see here in the discussion is that someone is asking, can you explain the difference between your interpretation of a sprint versus a sprint in the Scrum guide? So I think, the
Sure.
challenge is like, what's the connection between Scrum methodology and your sprint?
Yeah, there's really no connection except that sprint as a descriptor for a time-boxed, period of work. So look, when I named the design sprint, this was at Google in 2010, and among the teams I knew, hardly any used Agile, anything like that. But the engineers were familiar with it. They were familiar with the concept of a sprint. So in our vocabulary at that time, to say a sprint, it just meant like it's focused work on something. I'm going to take a few days and I'm going to focus for this time box period on one thing. And so for me, it was just a simple way to shorthand like, hey, we're going to, we need to establish a design. Uh, we need to establish a plan before we start building. So that's a design sprint. So you shouldn't read too much into a connection with Agile or try too hard to figure out, what the connections are. What I've found in practice is that the design sprint is a great way to start, no matter what method you use for execution. If you use Scrum for execution, if you use Agile, whatever you're using, you'll probably find that the design sprint makes a really nice way for you to establish confidence about what direction you're heading in. Run a simulation of what it would be like if your product was already finished and you launched it. Get a bunch of people who it might be hard to align. You might have some arguments down the road. Get those folks in the room in the beginning. Get each person to participate, give you their own opinionated version of the solution, make a decision about those. All those things are in the design sprint checklist. And at the end of that sprint week, or maybe, often you do two because you learn a bunch the first time you test it with customers, you run another design sprint iteration and you say, okay, now we've got confidence. Well, great. Now you can start whatever you want. You can start Agile, you can start Scrum. You go back to work as usual after the design sprint is over, but there's no real tight integration or, to be honest, deep thinking about how it fits in with Agile.
But what I'm learning from you here is that if you want to implement something, you need to use a methodology that is familiar to your audience. I think this is a good kind of takeaway.
Yeah, no,
so another
people, they say, oh,
Go ahead. Yeah, of course.
I was just going to say that, like, the methodology, I'll just say that, like, I've seen a lot of really high-performing, effective teams who use Agile. I've seen a lot of teams who use Agile, and it's a mess. And I've seen a lot of teams who, who do something that's more similar to Waterfall. Waterfall is like a dirty word, in the tech industry nowadays. But, like, Waterfall is like a way that you execute a really well-planned, like, long, specific thing. There's a place for that, and there are teams who work in that way and build amazing products. So to me, like, you have to find the method for execution that's right for you, and I don't have strong opinions about it, but I do have a strong opinion that none of those methods provide a great recipe for you to begin, for you to build confidence in the product market fit of what you're executing on. And the design sprint is the best that I've been able to come up with to help teams with that beginning, really scary, really often chaotic and messy moment of a project.
Right. I think this is the really, what makes it so powerful. I think, another interesting question that I have here in the chat is that, what are your thoughts on including asynchronous portions of a design sprint as a way to gather everyone's input regardless of schedules and time zones? Have you tried this kind of async setups?
Yeah, I have. And I think that's one of the really cool things about doing design sprints remotely, doing them, virtually distributed. If you're doing it with people in different time zones, if you're doing it with people who have odd schedules, you can more easily, over video, design it in such a way that everyone gets a chance to participate in those really meaningful steps. And often, the best thinking, I'm sure most folks I talk to are familiar with this feeling that you have your best ideas, not when you're in a conference room, staring at your colleagues and, counting down how long it is till you can go to the bathroom, but it's when you're on a walk, or you're taking a shower, or you're doing something else. You're waiting in line for a coffee somewhere, whatever. Like you're not maybe like laser focusing on the idea. You get the chance to think in the background, and then maybe your thoughts start to, and that's where sometimes the really cool ideas come from. So one thing that doing a design sprint remotely opens up is a chance to create some space where you say, hey, you got 2 hours to come up with this, solution to this question we asked you. Go off and do it, and you have to trust that people don't just go and, jump onto Twitter or whatever. But if you're lucky, they'll think, they'll walk around, and they'll have the chance in their own space with nobody staring in their grill to get something good done.
Yeah, I think this is really an interesting take on like how we can make sprints remotely. Another interesting question I have for you about remote setup is someone is asking you, do you have any tips to be inclusive if most of the team can join in person, but one or two members of the team are remote? I think this is kind of semi-remote situation. A lot of people are facing. So I'm wondering what you think about that.
I don't know if I have the best answer to this that anyone would have. Some folks may have a better answer, but my philosophy on that for a long time has been if only one or two people are going to be remote, you're probably better off having everybody go remote if you really want to have it be a level participation. If you really want the same participation from everybody, you're probably better off having every person be by themselves, because the people who are in a room together, it's very hard to fight that. We've spent as humans like hundreds of thousands of years, at least since we've been Homo sapiens, like developing the way we talk to each other. We're evolved to have these conversations in real life. And it's very hard as a two-dimensional person for you to crack into that room vibe when they're having a conversation about trying to solve the problem or sharing information. So it's tough. I would definitely recommend that until you hear somebody smarter than me, which you probably easily find, but find somebody smarter than me who has a better idea about how to incorporate that two-dimensional person into your three-dimensional space where you have a group. I'd say make everybody go remote. There's so many good tools now to do design sprints remotely. The first time I did one, I had nothing. I was doing it in Google Slides. It was a mess. And you've got so much better stuff now. So yeah, just split everybody up, and hopefully we'll all be, hopefully we'll eventually have the tools where somebody can feel like they're more physically present. We can involve them a bit better. I just don't know how to do it yet.
Yeah, of course. And I think another interesting question here is how do you, I think, especially right now when we are all remote and so busy with so many calls and maybe having challenges sometimes with brainstorming, I'm curious, how do you make sure that you come up out of the sprint with a true solution rather than just more action items? How do you kind of make sure that the quality of ideas is there?
Part of the key to this design sprint is that you are focusing and you spend the first day talking about where you're going to focus. Who's the most important customer type for us? And what's the most important moment of this product or service that we're building? Where's the point where we have the biggest opportunity, the biggest risk? A lot of times in spot. And when you define that moment, and then the rest of the design sprint, you know that you are looking ahead to building a prototype, a simulation of that moment. And at the end of the week, you're going to show it to 5 of your target customers. One at a time, you're going to interview them, show them a prototype, and create effectively the simulation of like, what would it be like if we were already done with the whole thing and somebody was experiencing that moment. And I think that framework is a lot different from the framework of most meetings that I've been in my career. A lot of meetings, they are sort of organized to move things a couple degrees, a couple, just, a millimeter or two down the road. And as you move millimeter by millimeter, we have to do that, but as you move millimeter by millimeter by millimeter, you give people action items and bullet points, and you're like, okay, I guess I got my 3 action items I got to do. All right. I hope so-and-so does theirs, whatever. Yeah, it's frustrating as hell. Like, the cool thing about the design sprint is you stop doing that for a week and you just say, we're just doing this big thing. So when you come up with the solution, hey, this is important. This is what we think is the most important moment of this whole product. We're spending a whole week trying to solve it. So I'm not going to give you like 5 minutes to come up with a solution. I want you to take like hours to think about this. I want you to take a long time, and I want you to fill up like a sheet of paper with a done for how it looks. People, and you give us and you raise questions. We're not like a big comment problem because as it.
I see. I think my last question today is about, exactly that. How do you make time for the whole week commitment? Because I think what I see a lot of versions of the question about like stakeholder buy-in and how do you get this week for ideating? Because in a lot of organizations, it's hard for people to justify this commitment. So I'm wondering, what's your best tips for that? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, sure. And I apologize for the video lag. I saw a little, it was a funny little thing there watching it catch up for you guys. There's two, I'd give you two big tips, two big strategies here. Number one is a thing called Lightning Decision Jam. You can look it up online, Lightning Decision Jam. And I know you can find great templates for it on Miro and a video on YouTube showing how to do this. It's like a little miniature design sprint, like a 1.5 hour activity you can run with a team. It's a good way to give them the flavor of the design sprint. I think that's a good strategy for breaking the ice with people having some comfort with this idea of a highly structured process and how much better that can be than a meeting. The second strategy is to go right to your boss, go right to the person who can make this thing happen. Buy them a copy of the book if you like. I mean, I know that's self-serving, but the reality is there's something kind of magical about a book. When people see it, they think like, oh, like this, gosh, this must be kind of like a real thing. There's like a book here. And I don't know why that works so well, but, say like, hey, I think that we are at risk of wasting a lot of time on this project. In the way that makes the most sense, and say, I'd like to experiment with trying a design sprint, but I need your support to make this happen. And that is going to be, if you can get that cover from that person from the start, that's the most powerful way to make the change. If you need to do it in a grassroots way, introduce it, try the Lightning Decision Jam, or try little pieces of the design sprint process in your regular meetings. And that's another way that people find success with this. It can just take longer.
Right, right. And I think as we are coming up on time, I see that people are, there are a lot of questions around what are the main challenges of remote sprint and what are the best kind of ways to overcome them. I think we discussed it in so many ways today, but I wonder like if the people can take something like one or two things out of these sessions, what's your best advice for remote design sprints?
Well, my best advice, it's a little complicated, but if you go to thesprintbook.com, so I'm going to hold up, I wrote it down so people want to see it. Make sure I get it on camera. Thesprintbook.com, there's a remote sprint guide on there, and it's free, and it's got a guide to how to sort of modify all of the steps that are in the book in a way that'll make it work online. And we created this guide by talking to tons of people around the world who had been running remote sprints. We did this at kind of the beginning of the pandemic, so probably time for like a version 2 of it already, because things have changed, tools have improved even in that time. But there are a ton of techniques in there that you can use, and that's probably better than me sort of rattling off all of them. But one of the keys, as I mentioned earlier, is you have to manage energy. So you're going to want to come up with a schedule that works for everyone, no matter what time zone they're in. And the guide can help you think through how to do that. And really, the other key that we haven't talked about is the tools. You're going to want to think a lot about what tools you're using and make sure you're super comfortable with them up front. What's the whiteboard you're using? What's the video tech you're going to ask everybody to use? Make sure they can get into it. Make sure people have the paper and pens on hand and stuff to make it happen. So those are a couple, but there's a bunch more in the guide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think from my side, I can also say that we have a Miroverse template with a lot of guidance as well. So thank you so much, Jake, for this conversation. And hopefully all the design sprints go remotely really well. Thank you.
Thanks.